Streaming live in front of a studio audience from the Juneau Live Studio at Resurrection Lutheran Church in beautiful downtown Juneau, Alaska, this is Juneau Eats. Today, we're going to be looking at how to make various bean dishes, and we have a guest, President of Resurrection Lutheran, Karen Laufer. Now, your host, Sarah Lewis.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to the second episode of Juneau Eats on Juneau Live. I'm Sarah Lewis. I'm with the University of Alaska Fairbanks Cooperative Extension Service. I'm the Family and Community Development Agent for Southeast Alaska. I'm centered here in Juneau, but I serve all of Southeast. And most of what I teach and write about and have fun with is food. And so what we're going to be doing today is I am going to be talking a little bit about expiration dates, because that is something that's very, very confusing to a lot of people. All those dates that are on different boxes and cans and jars and things, we're going to talk about that. When should you not eat something? When is it okay to eat it? We're going to talk about that a little bit. I'm going to talk with Karen about specifically the food pantry here at Resurrection Lutheran. We're going to look at some of the food that she pulled from the pantry, and we're going to talk about those dates to do some real life examples. And then we're going to have Chris, who's normally a co-host here with me. He is going to be on site. He's out at the food bank, and he's going to do a little piece on some very specific large cans of beans that we are wanting to talk about and that the food bank has available for people. But what do you do with a big, huge can of beans? So then I'm going to talk about things you can do with a big, huge can of beans. And I'm actually going to try to do a little bit of cooking. So we'll see how I do with that today. So first of all, I want to go right on in and talk about food expiration dates. So there are so many different terms for expiration dates. And what's complicated is I say expiration dates, but there's very few things that actually say expires by on a jar or a can or a box of food. And when we're talking about this, we're talking about foods that are either fresh, so maybe they come from the bakery or the deli or the dairy aisle. So there's those types of food that maybe do need refrigeration, or you know that they are going to go, they're not going to be good to eat after a period of time. But we're also talking about cans and boxes of food, that all of these are required to have some kind of date on them. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So first I want to talk about the sell-by date. So the sell-by date is really just information for the supermarket, for the seller. It's to let them know that the next batch of whatever it is going to be coming in. The goal is to sell it by, or you're going to start to have too much stock. It's to help them know when to turn over their stock. It really means almost nothing to the consumer. So that's the sell-by date. Then there is the best by date. There's best by or best if used by, and that's entirely also about quality, not about safety. So, it means that if you purchase it after that date or use it after that date, then it's not going to be the best quality, and that's going to mean something completely different for different products. So products in a can, those are safe for years and years and years and years, but their quality will start to reduce over time. And so the producers, the people who are filling those cans, and the manufacturers, they actually need to put a date on there just to give us an idea and to give the merchant an idea of when it was made, when they really do need to be moving things through. But it actually, again, has nothing to do with food safety for the consumer. Then so you'll see sell-by dates like I was talking about on milk, yogurt, dairy products, lunch meats, salads, ready-to-eat foods. There will be a sell-by date. Then there will be the best if used by date on all kinds of products. And you will also see on some things a pack date, and that just is when the item was packed, when that jar was filled, when that can was filled, when that box was filled. And again, doesn't give much information to the consumer. That might give, it's more information if, for example, there's a recall on a food. Then manufacturers know that everything that was packed on that date, they need to pull from the shelves or something like that. It gives a date, a datum point that everybody can use, but it really doesn't mean anything about food safety. So canned goods will sometimes have that, cookies, crackers, things like that. Then, very similar to the best by date is the use by date. That, again, actually doesn't have anything to do with food safety. It's about when is that going to be its best quality. So it's a recommendation to use it by. It's not that on this date, this is not going to be good to eat anymore and maybe unsafe for you. That's not what that is. Now, the one term and date that you do really want to pay attention to is the true expiration date. And it will say that. There are very few products that have a firm expiration date. And so when you see that, it will actually say expires on or expiration date. And so that is actually for products that for one reason or another are not going to they're not going to do what they are packaged to do. So medications will lose their efficacy. Vitamins will start to not have the strength that is advertised on the bottle over time. Formula and baby food, those are two things that are always going to have an expiration date, and you need to pay attention to that expiration date because we need to be really careful and knowledgeable about the nutrition that we are giving our infants. And so if if a jar is kept too long and the nutrition isn't quite as much, people who are needing to pay attention, obviously, to how much nutrients their infant is getting, they don't want to be using a jar that doesn't actually have what it says it has in it. So there are very few things that are expiration, and again, those actually don't have anything to do with food safety. Those have to do with the efficacy. It's not going to be bad for you, it's just not going to do the good for you that it is supposed to do. So that's why it's super confusing, all these dates, because not actually a single one is about your food safety. Because something that you need to remember is food doesn't become unsafe for us just through its natural sort of degradation process. It's actually contamination with bacteria that is what's going to make a food unsafe. If, for example, this carrot is left in the pantry too long or left in the cool box in your refrigerator too long, it's going to start to lose its moisture. It may eventually, if left long enough, it may mold, or it might get a little bit slimy. And you're going to know that's happened, and that's yeasts and molds that are doing that. And some of its enzymes that are in the carrot that might turn it brown, things like that. That is not bacteria that is harmful to you. The way that things become harmful is through contamination with bacteria, not through the natural sort of degradation or getting stale process or getting sour process for dairy, things like that. Though there may be people who are sensitive to yeasts and molds, those are not universally dangerous to us. It's the bacteria that you get concerned about, the E. coli, the salmonella, things like that. And those happen through a completely different process. So if you are using good sanitation in your kitchen, if the people who produced it, and if they're a commercial business, they have all kinds of people watching them to make sure that they are producing the food in a safe, uncontaminated way, you don't need to worry about that kind of stuff if you're doing the general sanitation stuff in your home. So let me see. So what you need to be paying most attention to is this concept that you just need to have in your head, because it's not going to be on any of the packages, general freshness. And you have to use your senses for that. So I talk about the 5 senses when it comes to figuring out if your food is not good to eat anymore. So you've got, of course, smell. That's a really good first one. So smelling your milk. So for example, if you get a carton of milk and it has what kind of date would that have? That would have a sell-by date on it typically. It may have a use-by date, which is a very similar thing. If that milk, that carton of milk, has been kept cold the whole time, which it is supposed to be, sometimes when we're in Alaska, that might be longer time than in other places, but if it's kept cold, you have a good, after that use-by date, you have a good week, sometimes much more, if you haven't opened it and you've kept it in your refrigerator. So I was in Teneke Springs a couple of years ago, and of course it takes even longer for things to get to some of our small communities, and I went and I bought a big old carton of milk from the Teneke, from Snyder Mercantile over there, and I got back to the house where I was staying and discovered that it was about a week past its use-by date. And I went, oh no, but it had never been opened. I opened it up, and using my senses for the next week, that milk was perfectly fine. We kept it cold, and it was perfectly fine for the entire time we were there, well after that use-by date. But I used mostly my sense of smell for that one. So then another one, of course, is sense of sight. So if you see mold, and you'll be looking for actually something fuzzy, so pink, black, white, green, there'll be different colors, but if you see mold, that product typically needs to go. There are some exceptions to that. Hard cheese, for example, you can scrape that mold off, but almost everything else, if you see mold, it means there's actually mold throughout that product. So like if there's a moldy piece of bread and it's just got mold on a corner, there's probably mold throughout that, and you're gonna taste it. So you'll see it, and if you don't happen to see it and you toast up that piece of bread and then you take a bite, that's the other sense. You're gonna taste it. If it tastes wrong to you, it's not good. Don't eat any more of it. Don't eat anything that tastes bad. And then also touch. So it's kind of sight as well, but touch, if the texture of something is wrong, if it's thicker than you expect it to be, if it's gloppy, if it's clumpy, if it's a lot drier than you would normally see it, if it's slimy, things like that. So if the texture of it is wrong, either when you touch it or when you actually put it in your mouth, then that's another sign that it has spoiled and you want to get rid of that food. And then my favorite one is the one that I don't know, you can sacrifice your kids to this one, but if you hear someone complain about a food that it doesn't taste right or something like that, go ahead and let that be your indicator that you don't need to give it a try and you can get rid of it. So that's how you use your senses, and that's how, unfortunately or fortunately, we actually determine whether our food is good to eat. Those dates don't help us a whole lot, except maybe as a little bit of a reference to let you know the life of that product, when it was made, when they think it'll be, starting to not be as good a quality, etc. But again, anything that has an actual expiration date, you must pay attention to that. So that's the 101 on expiration and best by dates, etc. And so now we are really, really lucky to have Karen with us, who is with the food pantry here, and we were just going to kind of in real life look through some of these products.
Yes.
Thank you so much for joining.
Well, thank you, Sarah. So these are products that we typically get through donations or through the food pantry, and oftentimes people will look at it and go, oh, it's no good.
Right.
So it's really helpful that you went through expiration dates and what that all means. So I have some samples here, and we can talk about.
Like, what would you do if you saw this one? What
exactly.
would you do? Yeah.
So here is a typical box of dried spaghetti, very common that we get. And it has the expiration, or it has the sell-by date.
You often have to look
Right.
all over. Often if it says sell by and there's a little
Yeah.
blank, you won't actually find it. You'll find
Right.
it somewhere else.
And things like dried beans and spaghettis and pastas and everything, generally, they can stay on a shelf for years. As long as the package has not been opened or tampered with or anything else, oftentimes they can do that. Now, we also get things like cookies, which has a sell-by date. And again, if the package has never been opened or anything.
I actually grabbed this one as a little
Yes.
bit of a trick. Because,
So-
and I think I got this
good.
from a box out there that was
Yes.
like, yeah, not going to sell. Not because of the date, but because the packaging has been ripped. And so that's one of the things to be paying attention to in things that are in paper or in boxes like
Right.
this that may have something that could get a hole in it or something. So that's another thing to pay attention
Right.
to. And you guys did, because I actually found this in a,
We're not going to, yes, we're
Right.
not going to give that out. Oftentimes we get, these are ones, we get a lot of fresh baked goods that they have, of course, their dates by it, and then oftentimes they've reduced it because they're going to try and sell it sooner, and then we get it as like this, and someone will go, well, yes, but once again, if the package hasn't been opened, what I often wonder about, and I'm going to refer to you, the expert, is something like this. Someone's not going to sit down and eat a whole box of croissants.
right.
Well, I might in a stressful situation, but they're
That's not
not
a
going
blanket
to.
statement, yeah.
No, that's not. But these are also things that could be frozen.
Frozen. Yep. Yep.
And then they can be thawed out
Yes.
and appropriately. And then we get things like, of course, in our canned goods, which are very often done. The first thing that we will do at the food pantry is, one, we make sure that there's no dents
Yes.
in the cans, that the can is okay, because of course, if there is a dent or something, that could very well be the mechanism to bring in bacteria.
Right. Exactly.
So the cans are oftentimes checked over to make sure that there are no dents in them. And then the one that, now it doesn't happen quite often because we don't get a lot of natural peanut butters, but it's interesting because oftentimes people will go, well, but this has got oil on top and the peanut is down on the bottom. Again, if the package is fine,
Yep.
and in this case, most of the time
Yep,
they're
it's got a
sealed.
freshness seal.
Yes, so then that's quite all right. Now you'll have to mix up the peanut
And
butter.
that's the quality issue, is that over time
Yes.
it's separated, doesn't have anything to do with safety, but
It's-
you're
right.
going to have to use some elbow grease to get it back together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now we do get, and I'm glad you talked about this, because sometimes we do get some medications. I mean, all of them, of course, are over the counter. But again, we're looking at expiration dates. So they're not bad, they may not be as effective.
Correct.
So-
Right. And that actually goes to, I didn't bring up like cake mixes and baking soda and things, and like boxes of pectin. Those are also ones that become less effective over time, and so their expiration date is one you want to pay attention to as well, because it's not going to gel or help your bread rise or whatever it might be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then, again, oftentimes, like we will get cans, and there's liquid inside the can and everything. But again, if the seal has not been broken, and it's very nice, of course, when you have, a can, because you can see right away if the
Right.
seal, or if the lid has been bulging a little bit, then you know that that's not safe.
Right.
That bacteria has gotten in. But one thing that I say, and this is because of my background growing up on a dairy farm, and of course, so we had milk all the time. But I tell people about freezing milk. And a lot of times people, they look at me like, that's about the craziest thing that I've ever seen. But I suggest if you have a milk that the sell-by date is past the sell-by date, but it smells fine, you open it up, it smells fine, you take the taste, it tastes fine and everything, put it in ice cube trays.
That's a great idea.
And you can actually freeze the milk and then it'll last way longer.
Right.
And so, because we often get a lot of those. And like you said, with the cheeses, yes, you know, I mean, it could mold as soon as someone gets it. I mean, we never put out cheese that would be moldy,
Right.
but we can't necessarily see it. I mean, it's packaged, it's still okay. It might be, you know, that it's starting to turn, but you can easily take the mold off of the cheese.
Cheese, yeah, hard
So,
cheeses.
yes. And then the last thing, and we didn't bring out anything, is the fresh vegetables.
Yes.
And fresh vegetables, of course, with a lot of them, if they're not like a hard apple and they're kind of getting mushy, that's really got nothing to do with the quality of the food.
Right.
It's a mushy apple, which means you may want to just,
Or the safety of the food. It has to
right, the
do with-
safety
yeah.
of the food.
Yeah.
Something that you could just cook up
Right.
with that. And the same thing with arugula and spinach. Because oftentimes they come in the packages and the sell-by date, and people go, well, it's kind of, you know, it's not as fresh as it would look. I'm surprised at how many people have never seen or tried to cook up spinach. And spinach can be cooked easily and still maintain all of its nutritional
Right.
value, and it's
All of the
quite
dark
fine.
greens, right,
All of the dark greens,
And there's
yes.
some that we assume that you have to cook, like kale. A lot of people think you have to cook that, but you can have that raw. Whereas spinach, we think of cooked spinach as being yucky, which is wrong.
Right.
When you're putting spinach into a recipe, it's not the same as getting that packed thing of, you know, the Popeye spinach out of the can where it's all mushed together. Even that is perfectly great. You're just not necessarily gonna,
Right.
you know, spoon it out.
And my favorite, arugula.
Yes,
I
arugula is
love
lovely.
I love to cook up arugula, and a lot of people have no idea, one, what arugula is or how it tastes. It's one of my favorite dark greens, but
Right.
to cook that up and put it, as I tell people, because oftentimes we have soups and we have ramens, and I said,
Oh, that's the
take a
best.
ramen
Yeah.
and then put in some arugula or spinach, and you've almost got a superfood.
Right, exactly, right there.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
I appreciate the work that you do here at the food pantry, so thank you very much
Well,
for doing that
we
service.
we strive really hard to make sure that people get the food that they need,
Yep,
and we all are committed that they get safe food. And so
safe and nutritious food. That
safe
is
and
the goal, for
nutritious
sure.
food. And oftentimes, like I said, that involves getting a lot of fresh meats and dairy and vegetables. But everybody likes that, and how we can help them use that food, even, and so it's not unsafe,
Right.
and it's still delicious.
Right, and so that's one of the biggest reasons that we waste so much food in our country is because of these dates, because they're so confusing and people think, oh, that it's going to be unsafe past that date, but it's just not true. And so it's really good to let people know that it's just the quality that might be
Exactly.
reducing after that date. Don't just throw it away because of that date.
All right.
thank
And
you
so
so
now
much.
you're going to show us a
am.
wonderful recipe. Thank
I am.
you.
We're going to move on to beans. Beans. Thank you so much, Karen. So what we're going to do first is actually we are going to cut to the video that we have of Chris at the food bank. Are we ready to go with that?
Hi everybody, Chris Schapp here, manager of the Southeast Alaska Food Bank, coming to you for our second episode of Juneau Eats. It's nice to see everybody again. So as promised, as you can see, cannellini beans is what we're talking about here today. So over the course of our episodes this season, we're going to talk about different foods that are readily available out here at the food bank. So I don't have a demo today. Sarah, my partner, co-host, is hopefully going to be able to whip something together for the next segment that you see. But today, we want to talk about cannellini beans. These cannellini beans were donated to us from Norwegian Cruise Lines. We have a lot of them, so we've got plenty of product here if anybody is interested in the cannellini beans. We put them out at every pantry that we do. They're also available to all the members. Now, it's a little intimidating, the 5-pound can. For example, the 1-pound can, 16 ounces of kidney beans, 5 of these in one of these cans. So you do have to be preparing something that's quite large or numerous meals that you can then either, eat within a week, putting things back in the fridge, or possibly freeze them and save them for meals down the road. Today, I want to do a little education on the cannellini bean. I did a deep dive Google search to find out more about the cannellini bean. I didn't know a lot about it other than it was a white bean, and I've used it before when I've made chili and things like that. So went onto our great World Wide Web. It turns out that there's 4 different types of white beans. The navy bean, the great northern bean, cannellini bean, and the lima bean. They're all basically the same family. The difference with the white bean is that it's just the color. The white bean is basically the same exact thing as the kidney bean, just a different color. In fact, most people around the world call the cannellini bean the white, larger kidney bean. Same shape, same consistency basically, the same great nutritional values. Looking at the cannellini bean, you'd say, okay, how did the cannellini bean come about? Well, through history, they've determined that in Argentina, that was the first place they actually grew the cannellini bean on a massive scale. Now, over in Europe, especially Italy and Spain, where these are actually produced from, cannellini beans are huge. They use them in a ton of their cooking. We also looked into, where you use a cannellini bean kind of determines, the flavor profile, things you're going to get out of them. So you can do things like the soups and the stews and, basic things like that. But there's a lot of things that you can do to kind of jazz up your cannellini bean. A lot of basic spices that are in most people's, cabinet, thyme, marjoram, rosemary, oregano, bay leaves, parsley, celery, including the tops of the celery too, especially when you're using them in preparations like soups and stews, because they will add a lot of flavor and they'll make the dish look really nice too. As far as other enhancers that you can use for your cannellini beans, everybody loves bacon. Crumble up a little bit of bacon, put that in your soup or your, whatever, you're doing a bean salad or whatever. It jazzes it up. Onions, a little bit of garlic, things like that. Shallots. A lot of people don't use shallots. It's, your punch is going to be pretty big for the shallot, so just use a little bit, try it out, see what you think. But so many of these things that you can use to mix in with the cannellini beans gives them a little more jazz. Tomatoes, things like that, artichokes, avocados, different things like that. I went through and I did kind of just a regular search on things that you could make. I came up with some fritters. You just actually take the beans and you mash them up, and then you put a little cheese with them. You know how I love cheese. A little bit of cheese, and then you just fry them in a pan. You just smash them up, fry them in a pan, turn them over golden brown. They're really nice, and kids love them too. You can do things like the cannellini dip, where you put a little roasted red pepper in there, jazz it up. You can either mash it by hand or you can put it in a blender. You can actually make a mashed garlicky bean like a potato mash and add some garlic and some butter and some olive oil, and it comes out really good as well. And then little croustines. We always have bread out here at the food bank, so you just slice up bread really thin, toast it up. You take your beans, you can mash it if you like, put it on top, add a little mint to it. They come out really nice. And the last thing I want to go over real quickly, like last episode, we've got our tortilla shells, tacos, fish, added to your cannellini beans. The one thing I wanted to highlight, and I know Sarah's going to touch on this more in the next segment, but there's a lot of health benefits to the beans, and especially cannellini beans. They're extremely high in protein. 1 1/2 cup of beans actually equals 1 ounce of meat. So think about 1/2 cup of beans. That's equal to 1 ounce of chicken, or 1 ounce of pork, or 1 ounce of beef. So you're getting a lot of protein from these guys, which is really important. A lot of carbs, good healthy carbs that are in there, fiber, vitamins, minerals. So, if you can incorporate beans into your meals a little bit more, yes, you know the phrase, beans, magical fruit, and all the things they do for you, but they say in moderation, if you can build up a little bit more, your body gets used to it and it won't be as bad. But there's a lot of health benefits. It's good for your heart, it's good for your gut. They say that it helps increase all the good things that happen inside your system, and can actually help you lose weight if you're trying to diet or just be healthy in general. So eat your cannellini beans. We've got them available all the time. Like we talked about last week, jazz it up. Add some salsa, your flour tortillas. Have a blast. Look up the recipes for cannellini beans on the web. There's a ton of them, and a lot of them look really good. You can even get your kids to try it again. So thanks for joining me today. I'll throw it back to Sarah in the studio. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.
So that was wonderful, Chris. Thank you so much. One of the things that I love about the work that Chris is doing out at the food bank is that he's not just interested in, just getting food out to people. Of course, that's the foundation of his work, but he also wants to make sure that people enjoy that food. Anybody who says just chuck a jar of salsa in with that, that's a person who likes to eat good, tasty food, so I really appreciate that. And I also like that he talked about some of the important nutritional aspects about beans, which is that they are a probiotic. They are one of the foods that when we eat them, they actually help feed the microorganisms, the microbiotics that are in our gut that help us digest, that we actually know there's been research that shows that they help with mood and other sort of overall body health issues. And so beans are an amazing, amazing vegetable, legume is what they are. So, and of course, because you can get dry beans and canned beans, they have a lot of them, obviously big old cans of them at the food bank. And so I want to talk a little bit about first what you can do if you get one of those big cans. Because that's pretty daunting, especially if maybe you're a small family, 1 to 4 people. That's a really big amount of beans. And so one of the things that you want to do first is, as soon as you need to open that can to use them, plan what you're going to do with the beans in there. If you only need maybe 2 cups of those beans for a soup and the rest is going to be unused, you need to plan to freeze those. Or refrigerate them if you're going to use them within, with less than 5 days. You can go ahead and refrigerate them. More than 5 days, you want to freeze them. Now, there's some tips about how to do that. So what you want to do is you actually want to drain those beans, and then you want to rinse them. And I'm going to show you a little example of that when I do a little bit of cooking. But then when you're actually getting ready to store them in the refrigerator or in the freezer, you want to refill whatever container you have them in with fresh water. You'll be freezing them in water. And that helps keep those beans fresher when they're frozen. And then when you want to use those beans, you just thaw it out. You can even just thaw it out in a colander in the sink for a little while, because they will pretty quickly, the water will melt, it'll melt away, and then you've got those beans that you can use, even use them raw for bean salads, things like that. But if you have stored them in amounts that you might normally use in a recipe, like 1 cup at a time or 2 cups at a time, then you're not going to be wasting all of those beans. You can put serving sizes in the freezer and use them later. So what I'm going to do right now is one of the recipes that we are going to have, we're going to put together, and we're going to actually have it with each one of those cans, so that when people get one of those big, huge cans, they have some ideas about how they can store them and different recipes. I'm actually going to do a Tuscan bean soup. So with those cans, I'll give both a recipe for a huge batch of Tuscan bean soup, but also if you actually take that out, freeze it in portions, I'm going to do a recipe right now that is a mini version that might be good for actually just one person. So we've got a hot plate here. I've got my pan, because I'm just doing a mini version. I'm going to put that on the hot plate. We're going to see exactly how hot that is as we go on. But first, just about a tablespoon or maybe a little less of cooking oil. I'm using olive oil, but you can use what you have, is perfectly fine. Olive oil tends to be kind of one of the traditional sort of oils for sort of Mediterranean kinds of food, which is this sort of falls into the Mediterranean eating pattern. So then a base for most many soups that are Mediterranean in origin is carrots, celery, onions, and garlic. So this is just, I've washed this carrot, but I'm not going to peel it. I tend not to peel my carrots. That is not that's more a laziness issue. I really like to do things fast. So I'm just going to slice these, get them into that oil that's heating up. Here I am risking all kinds of things by using a sharp knife on live TV, but here we go, live it up. All right, so we're going to put this carrot we're going to get rid of the top and the root end. One smallish carrot going in there. And this is where I'll kind of know how high to put this hot plate, because we're hoping for it to start to sizzle a little bit here eventually. So carrot. Then I've got a small onion. You can use any kind of onion, red, white, yellow. Cut off the root end and the top. Often when you do that, you'll get a little corner here, and you can pull off the peel. That's often the most tedious part, dealing with both onions and garlic, is the peeling process. But of course, it is necessary. And this one is pretty small, so it's not too hard. And I personally like large chunks of onion. Some people like smaller pieces, so you can cut it as fine or as coarse as you would like. And we're going to put that in with the carrot. So I'm one of those strange people who really likes raw onion. I don't indulge in raw onion very often, but I love onion. I love onion and garlic, and so that's why I kind of like larger pieces, because I actually don't like my onion to mush out. Some people, my husband, for example, he does not like it when I leave onions in big pieces, because some people really do prefer it to be pretty well cooked, because that actually does make the onion a bit sweeter when you cook it. So stir that around a little bit, turn up the heat, I want to get this boosted. Okay. If you compost or if you throw it away, either is fine. Then the next one is garlic. Garlic is another one that you need to typically peel. So I usually cut off that sort of root end that holds the peel all together. And then what a lot of people do is they will take the side of the knife, if you're using a large knife, and bang it like that, and that loosens up the skin. It also crushes it slightly. Garlic, it's good to actually cut and crush it slightly before you use it and let it sit for a bit, because it actually letting the garlic sit for a few minutes actually lets some of those, the good garlicky chemicals in it actually develop a little bit more. But I'm going to go ahead and use this just right away. It's starting to sizzle in there. I usually put the garlic in after other things, because garlic, if it starts to get burnt, will get bitter. And so I'd rather it have garlic flavor than that bitter flavor. So I usually put it in a little bit later. Now, here's a little lesson in needing to substitute things. So I wanted to cook something today that has things that were in my house. Nothing special. But we happened to use up all of our celery yesterday, so I don't have a piece of celery. So the recipe calls for a piece of celery. But what I did instead, because I do like that flavor, celery is one of the base flavors of many soups, is I actually grabbed some celery seed. So I'm going to go ahead and put a little pinch of that in there, just to give it a little bit of that flavor. I'll stir that up with the sautéing vegetables. All right, starting to smell like food. I'm also going to put in a bit of salt. I love salt. Though there are, of course, issues with salt, it is a flavor enhancer. So don't use a whole lot, because then it'll actually just be salty. But if you use just a bit, it's a nice flavor enhancer. It's funny, but salt actually can make things that are bitter taste a little bit less bitter. They'll actually move more towards the sweet side than the bitter side. So if you have folks in your family who aren't as thrilled with onions, cooking them with some salt will help with that. All right, so then I'm going to do the beans. I'm actually just using a little can of beans, because it was even overwhelming to me to think about trying to do something with one of those big number 10 cans. So I'm actually going to show you what I tend to do when I am using beans. I'm just going to use this. We don't have a sink nearby, so I'm just going to use this as sort of a waste receptacle here. But I have the lid is still on there. I've cut it off. I've used the can opener. I'm going to drain these beans out as best I can. And then I am going to open the lid. But I'm trying to keep it so that the lid has a little bit of attachment still to the can, because what I'm going to do is normally I would do this at a sink, but I'm going to pour a little water just straight into the can. This will help rinse the liquid off the beans. Now, one of the things that Chris mentioned was the magical fruit properties of beans. And getting rid of the soaking water and then also rinsing them a bit does actually help mitigate some of those problems. You'll get rid of some of the chemicals that are in beans that tend to give us a little bit of gastrointestinal work that can sometimes be odoriferous. So I'm just going to rinse those again. And as he said, the more beans you eat, the less difficulty your digestive system will have with those. All right, so I'm just going to do that much, but you can rinse them as much as, another way you can rinse them is to put them into like a colander and then rinse them just directly under a faucet. So I'm going to put these beans in here. This is actually cooking right along, which is awesome. I'm going to get some of those last ones out. All right, paper towels. So I put the beans in there with the veg, stir it around a little bit. And one of the things that you can do for this particular soup, it'll kind of thicken it a little bit if you mash some of the beans. So you can just periodically just sort of mash some of the beans against the side. You can actually, if you're using one of those big number 10 cans, you can actually mash some of them right in the can there before you put it, if you're doing a really big batch. So what that'll do is it actually will make the final product a little bit creamier without having to use any dairy products or thickeners and things like that. the beans themselves will actually help to thicken. All right, I turned it down a little bit too much. Turn it back up. All right, so then comes stock. So I have here, just because I decided to go ahead and keep this vegan, basically, it's all vegetable-based foods in this. I decided to go ahead and use vegetable broth, but you can use beef, you can use chicken. You can use, if you are a hunter, you can use venison stock, whatever kind of stock that you like. You can use a bouillon. You can use bouillon and water if that's what you have. That works great as well. I'm going to put about 2 cups of this. So what you could do is if you have a can, a 15-ounce can of stock, that's the perfect amount. These boxes are equal to about 2 of those cans. So I'm just going to use 2 cups. And I'm going to let that heat up as well. And I'm going to add a little bit of oregano. And again, you know, you can use all different kinds of spices, whatever you, oregano, basil, parsley, thyme, rosemary, whatever you happen to have, go ahead and use it. I mean, some would say, some like to make it seem like there's a lot of magic to that, but the magic is doing what you want to eat. So the best food is the food that you enjoy, the nutritious food that you enjoy eating. So I'm going to let that come to a boil. And we may not be able to do that right here and now, so we might have to pretend it's coming to a boil, but I'm going to put the lid on it to maybe speed that up. And then I'm going to get to this so-called superfood, kale, because one of the great things about Tuscan bean soup is that it includes greens. Now, if you were going to be making a big batch of this from one of those big number 10 cans, you might not put the kale in at that time if you don't want to. You can, because the kale will cook very quickly, and so you can just put the kale or any other dark green, including if, so Karen was talking earlier about greens that maybe are starting to get a little wilty, and you think, oh, we can't use those. Those are actually, if they're not slimy, if they're not moldy, if they're not stinky, you can actually slice those up and put them in a soup, even something like romaine lettuce. So things that you don't necessarily normally think of putting in a soup, you can go ahead and do that if you have some that otherwise it might go to waste because you're not going to want to put it into a raw salad. So this kale right here, I tend to actually like the stems, but a lot of people do like to actually cut the leaf part off the stem and just use the leaf part, but I actually like both. So I'm going to be doing both, and I usually slice it into relatively thin slices because then it's a little bit, it's kind of like a noodle in a way. If you have too big of pieces, sometimes then it's hard to kind of keep it on a spoon, etc. So these are relatively small pieces of kale, leaves of kale, I should say. Another great thing to use, and you don't even need to do any cutting, is if you have some baby kale or baby spinach that's in one of those containers that you get. Those are pretty much ready to go. You can just grab a handful of those and put them into almost anything that you are making, and you've just added nutrition and fiber to what you are cooking. So this isn't coming to a boil, but that is totally just fine. We're going to go with this. And I'm going to add the kale. And all you do is just add it in there and you stir it in until it wilts. This might be, maybe for this size, a little more kale. I might actually, if I were doing this at home, I might actually add a little more liquid to make up for having added a lot of really good greens to this. And then what you do is, just like those senses that I talked about earlier when it comes to making sure that your food is still good to eat, you use your senses to figure out whether what you've cooked is tasty. Add a little more oregano, add a little more celery seed, add a little more salt, add some pepper. These are all great things to do to add flavor. If you're smart enough to figure out how to use the little pepper shaker, there we go. Add some pepper. And there we have it, some bean soup. So while this continues to cook a little bit, because I'm going to go ahead and give it to the crew, they can have some of this. It's all good stuff. Thank you so much for joining for the second episode. We are looking forward to the third episode that's going to be coming up. And we've got lots of different ideas about what we'd like to offer. One of the things that we've talked about is doing at least a segment on what you can do if all you have is a toaster oven or a slow cooker, something like that. If you don't have a full kitchen, what are different things you can do with those different smaller appliances? So those are some ideas. Other than that, please feel free to contact the Juneau Live folks and let them know if there's some things that would be helpful for you to know when it comes to good, healthy Juneau eating. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.